a lot of people are like, my vote will not count. What's that? But all of the conversations. But how are we telling them the story? You are not going to go and get a voter's card, but it is you tomorrow that will complain that they've increased transportation.
Yes.
How are we connecting the dots? How are we telling people what affects them and how? There's a story in everything, and there's a way that we can tell the story to drive social change. I do believe very strongly that stories can change the world.
This season of the Unamplified podcast is supported by the Open Society Foundations.
History is often written by powerful people, and sometimes the stories are incomplete, or worse, a total misrepresentation. As Africans, stories are part of who we are, from our folktales to the conversations we have on a daily basis. But the question is, do we realize the importance and the power of stories? Stories teach us a lot of things. We learn from stories. Stories shape behaviors. They shape cultures. But we struggle to leverage it as a tool to build power. Or more importantly, as a tool to transform social norms. Everyday stories are told about who we are. What stories are being told about us? What stories are being told about our communities? And most importantly, who are the authors of these stories? Are we duly and ably represented in the stories told about us? I've said a lot about stories. Welcome to the Unamplified podcast. My name is Cynthia Mbamali, your host, and today we'll be discussing storytelling, building the power within us. And I have my co-host with me today.
Hi, Amplifiers. As you all know, my name is Queen CY, and welcome to the Unamplified podcast. Today, we have two powerful women joining us virtually and in the studio. First, we have Priye Diri. We call her the woman who wears several hats. She is the director, a filmmaker, and an everyday warrior for survivors of gender-based violence. Welcome to the Unamplified podcast.
Thank you.
And also virtually joining us is Nneka Mobo. She is the founder of Uru Collective. She works with executive founders, journalists, and brands on the pivotal moments of growth. Welcome, Nneka, to the Unamplified podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, two powerful women. We have, thank God for technology, because I was looking for how to pull the neck. I said, technology, come to the rescue. So she's joining us virtually. And I have my sis here, Priye. We've been on several movements together. This woman, when they say these feminists that they are not here to joke with you, they know what they are here for. Now, Priye be that.
Please.
Yes, today we're discussing storytelling, the power within us. And both of you are storytellers. I follow your work online. I met Nneka, interestingly, last year, through under the Art for Democracy initiative supported by the Open Society Foundations. And that was when I got interested in her work. And I don't think she even knows I've followed her since then. But you, Priya, I've known, I can't even remember. For the longest time now. But I've seen like movies you've worked on. Beyond that, you use storytelling to do a lot of things in the work that you do. So I have a general question for everyone. What was that one story, or what was whether a story or a movie that you encountered that made you realize that stories actually inform or influence how people feel about things? What was that thing for you? I'll start with you, Priye.
I think for me, by the way, I'm so excited to be here on the podcast. I feel like Cynthia doesn't want to invite me. When will she invite me?
Oh.
And then I'm here, so
Yes.
Thank God. But I would say that the first story that I remember vividly changed me was from TV.
Okay.
We watched Tales by Moonlight. I can never forget.
Yeah.
And there was an episode of this young boy who had stolen something, and his father caught him and they took him to the king. You know the way the stories were, took him to the king and they ostracized him from society. I felt like now thinking about it, that was a bit too much.
That was a bit too much, I know. But like, did he steal? What did he steal? Did he steal the whole community?
Do you understand? But yeah, I remember that scenario and having to learn that stealing was wrong and was bad. And And then coupled with coming from a Christian home, when your mother will read to you the commandments, thou shalt not steal, kill, etc. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, yeah. And to be very honest, I just stolen something from my mother's like room, like maybe like 3 days before I watched that thing. And I started to think about how to go and tell her that, I took this before they ostracized me from my family. And I feel like that's, I'm not kidding. That story sort of like is etched in my mind. And I remember it sometimes and I'm like, yeah. So that was the one story for me.
That's interesting. Neka, what would it be for you?
So when I was I think this was in middle school for me. So I grew up in the US. And so a lot of my experience as a Nigerian American is colored by like what my parents, taught me in house. And at school, we'd been tasked with studying a part of history outside of the US. And so I chose the Nigerian Civil War. And so for like a year, we had, had to select different readings. You really, pick your own sources as well as looking at personal stories. And that's what led me to reading Chinua Achebe's There Was a Country. And so that was the first time I had kind of thought about history beyond a timeline of events, but rather from the perspective of people who were on ground at the time. And at the time, people who were my uncles, people who were aunts, even my grandmother. And so it sort of impacted on me this idea of telling stories from not just who, what, when, where, but rather like what were some of the deeper scars or some of the deeper through lines that still show up within, people and societies that were affected by this timeline. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of been my through line with anything I've worked on is what is the There Was a Country story of this particular situation. So whether it's working with artists, whether it's working with journalists, business executives, companies, what is There Was a Country story?
Wow. That's deep. Yeah, Quincy, why?
I think for me is Lion King. I could feel the fear, the loss, and the courage of Simba. It made me realize that a story can make you cry, laugh, or even rethink your life choices as a child. So I think that movie really, really did something in me that when I was little.
Wow, you said it did something in you.
It did something great.
Yeah. I know. I mean, I enjoyed the Lion King. I think for me, it would be the story of tortoise. So growing up, for every folktale, like the tortoise was this mischievous.
Oh my God.
And very, very fishy character.
Yeah.
But interestingly, maybe that was even the beginning of my consciousness around activism. There was this story that I was told that I think they went to the sky to eat and the birds borrowed him the feathers. And then he went and then they said the food is for all of us. And he claimed it was all of us and he ate everything. And so the birds got angry and they all took the feathers from him and then they left. And he wanted to come down. We asked his wife to bring out something or so, and then they brought bottles or so.
And they told about the wrong message.
The wrong message.
Yeah.
And then he brought like bottles and stones rather than a mattress or something soft. Yeah. So he fell, and that's why they thought so this had the crack. So for me, as a kid, I was so proud of the birds because I'm like, that's what people should be doing. Yeah. When someone does something bad, which was the story, when someone does something bad, the people can work together and hold you accountable for what you do, and that there are consequences when you betray a people you're meant to speak with together. Which is why I'm very big on collective accountability. When someone is doing something, you're the reason we brought you here. Yep. You're messing up. Okay, we start to get you to respond. But that story never left. But that it just shows us the powers of stories, And do we still tell folk tales now?
It's so sad.
I think it's going into extinction.
Nobody will be revived.
I hope it is. Because when we were younger, there were so many stories and they all had this moral, the moral of the story kind of thing. But yeah, Quincy.
Okay, Nneka, could you please tell us a bit about Uru Collective and why you got interested in storytelling and why it mattered to you as a young African?
So I'll take it from Uru Collective. So So I moved to Nigeria a couple years ago, and when I came, I was already running Uru as an agency that focused on talent management for artists. And once I reached here and, got to working with artists and also started working with a couple of companies and then later on some clients completely outside of music that, that I still work with today, I realized that while I enjoyed music, I wanted to go in the direction of working with people who influence the industries that they're in. So whether they're a journalist, whether they're a tech founder, some form of like a business executive, I wanted to work with people who are actively thinking about the holistic structure of their industry. And so, that led me to managing Joey Akan, who's arguably like our country's biggest music journalist, as well as his podcast, Afrobeats Intelligence. And then later on launching the second podcast, the Joey Akan Experience. And then, in between that time of working with him and then, working with brands, it became it's become an agency that, yes, we do talent management, but we're also a creative agency that helps brands figure out like how to integrate into the culture locally as well as globally. And so, the agency itself or Uru itself is kind of evolving because we're now producing original IP, aka podcasts and soon to be short films. And so it's a pretty exciting time. But that's how I started. Now, in terms of I think you asked about storytelling, right? As a young African.
Yeah.
So to me, at this time, we're at a really unique point in history. We're at a unique point in history globally, but especially within Nigeria, right? We're looking at a soon approaching election cycle. We're looking at ourselves and sort of asking, okay, where does Nigeria sort of go from here? And so to me, with the work I do, it's this consistent asking of myself of like, am I looking at solutions that globally have worked? And, maybe don't like, I guess globally, like it looks nice, but it doesn't necessarily respond to the local needs. Or am I actively, seeking solutions that work locally? Something I've learned, especially with building Uru and being here on ground, it's not just to tell the story, but it's to tell the story, through the speakers of, basically through speakers that people can hear. Because if it's not translating locally and there's a message there and you want it to reach, the Nigerian audience, right? You have to be mindful about how you're communicating. And so, so that's essentially me. I don't know if I answered what you're asking.
Yeah, I mean, I love the perspective. First, I think you do an amazing work with Uru Collective. For some reason, I usually used to, when I first interacted with your platform, somehow Uhuru was always coming to my head because I'm like, it's not Uhuru, it's Uru. But then again, Uhuru is very African. So we're like, we are not yet at Uhuru.
Yeah.
but if I think about the kind of work you do and why you think is important, most times we think, because it worked at the global stage, it will work here. Like these days, I don't like anything when they say this global best practices. I do not like that thing. For some reason, that thing used to pinch my body. Global best practices for me do not necessarily exist. Best fit, context specific, because and even within the context, there are some dynamics. What would work in this part of the country may not work in the other part of the country. Absolutely. And so we need to start designing for our audience, and we need to be conscious of these, diversities and peculiarities. And so I'll pull you in now, Priye. You wear several hats, obviously.
My head is spinning me.
Your head is spinning at this point.
From the arts,
and there are different types. Some of them like this, another one like that, Just wondering, as a filmmaker, I saw your recent project, Remy and Norma. Interesting. Remy and Norma, because it's a Ruth and Naomi story.
Yeah.
But when I saw the Remy and Norma, the Nigerian in me, Yoruba and Igbo, I was like, interesting. It's an interesting combination.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's one of your projects. You've been on several other, you can tell I'm a huge fan. I actually call you on my phone, you're saved as Priye Superstar.
Oh.
But let's leave that for another day. Do you think that there's a difference between, storytelling by Africans and then storytelling by Africans for a global audience?
Yeah, I do believe that there's a difference when an African tells a story for Africans than when an African story is told for the global audience. There's a controversy that's ongoing at the moment.
Yeah.
I will not name names.
Okay, but I think I know the one
You know what I'm talking about.
I know
yeah.
it.
I'm sure Ineka knows. She's laughing.
She's laughing.
Yeah. And that's really what happens when an African story is not told by Africans. The key thing is that I always say the people who own the story know how best to tell the story. It's like the adage that says, the person who is wearing the shoe knows where it pinches best.
True.
Yeah. And so oftentimes, like we've seen stories like Africans, for instance, when Woman King came out.
Again,
let me drink water.
Drink water, please. Drink water.
So that I can
but
swallow something.
I enjoyed Woman King, but I know where you're going to. What's less?
Okay, so I'm saying that when Woman King came out, I loved the film.
Yeah.
One of my favorite films so far by Jada Prince Bythewood. But I think that, when you want to tell a story for Africans, it should be told by the people that own the story. It's very important that our voices are not missing in that conversation. Oftentimes, like telling global stories, I've heard a lot of filmmakers say, oh, I'm telling this story for the global audience. And I always say you cannot tell a story for the global audience. You have to tell your story, and whoever connects with that story connects with that story. Not everyone will like your story. Not everyone will connect to the story that you're trying to tell. Yeah. And so it's very important that when filmmakers, when artists, when creators are trying to make stories or tell stories, they tell stories for the audience that they know would enjoy the story. Even with music, I'm sure the music we listen to these days are so different from what we used to know. There's the Afrofusion. You hear Burna Boy say that he doesn't make Afro beats. He makes Afro whatever whatever the name he decides to call it. Yeah. And so I think that it is really the fact that the westernization of a lot of African stories or of ourselves, like we're trying so much to be like the Western world, to fit into their narrative. Yeah. Which is one of the reasons why I always would say I stand Chimamanda Adichie. There's I'm Nigerian first before I'm anything else. True. Yeah. And so when we're telling stories, we have to think about where are you coming from? Whose story are you telling? And how are you honoring the voices of the people whose story that you've been so blessed with that you're now going to tell?
Wow. Nneka, I don't know if you have something to add to that.
I do. So, I mean, I believe in authenticity. I believe that we should tell our stories. I believe that we also need to be mindful about the economics of the creative industry, especially in Nigeria and Africa at large. I think the reason why we often tweak or adjust the scope is because who is funding the output and distribution of this story? That is also the challenge here. We're seeing this in music now, right? Where, over the last 10, 15 years we've had a rise in, Afrobeats to the world. About in the last 7 years, it's been pretty sustainable. We've had our artists, export to different markets, US, UK, etc. Right? They're telling their stories through music. Who funded the music and the creation and the possibility for them to even be able to export themselves? It was largely international companies. Very rarely, maybe Maven Records is like a unique case point, but even they are now funded by an international company and absorbed into an international company. Now let's go to other even within the film industry, right? Like how many of our production houses locally are able to fund the size of a film that even My Father's Shadow was, right? So while I believe that it's important for us to share our stories and to be very authentic in how we're sharing it, we also need to be mindful about putting our own backing behind what it is that or behind our stories, whether it's music, film, TV, etc., right? Because this story that has now been backed by an international production house, even though it was written by someone who's from here, or at least like has some background here, right? What did you expect them to not asking like everyone here, but like, what did we expect them to do, right? They're trying to maximize on their returns, and they know their audience, the audience that's capable of paying into the projects that they've put out. So I've struggled with this like here locally of like wanting to create that balance of like originality and authenticity, but at the same time, a lot of these creative conversations still boil down to infrastructure and economics, which is why it's such a pivotal point, because at least within the music space, that money is starting to dry up. Not even starting, it is drying up, right? And so now we have to look at ourselves at home and think about, not just in music, but across industries, right? What are we going to do? What is in place at this time to make it so that if somebody decides to be an artist and play a few gigs here and there throughout the week, that they can still feed themselves and their family? And we don't have the answer for that yet. I mean, even in tech, right? If somebody just wants to create an app that largely works for people who are in Ebonyi states, right?
Yeah.
Can they eat off of that? Can they sustainably, have a venture that maybe it's not exportable to, different markets, et cetera, but for the people of Ebonyi state, it works for them. I don't know if we are there yet.
Wow, this just made me deeply reflect. Listening to you, Priya and Nneka, I'm also thinking about even the work we do on democracy and in development work, because the funding is shrinking. There's an important point that has been made. One, authenticity. Two, understanding our audience and still trying to ensure we're telling the stories correctly, representing ourselves correctly and better. But we also need to start thinking about how we fund and how we build money, or let's say build money. How do we get the monies to support all of these initiatives? Internally, within the continent, I always ask myself, well, we have very rich people within the continent, but most times that generating resources within the continent to support both the creative industry and even the work on development is increasingly becoming challenging. Because we can't keep hoping that someone from the West would come and bring the monies to fund this, because the moment the monies come, actually, like we say, he who plays the piper dictates the tune. We start to struggle. Even as civil society organizations, sometimes you're collecting funds, you're like, this is the initiative that will work in my community. They'll tell you, this is what we think you should do.
This is our focus.
This is our focus. You're like, this is your focus, but this will not give results. This is what we need in this community. And so maybe this is how we need to start thinking. We are the audience. And if the audience determine what is produced necessarily, then maybe we need to start asking and demanding for the kind of content that in country would tell our stories better, because also the monies go based on the needs, the demands, the interest. And so if we're liking a particular kind of content, the creators will be focusing on that particular kind of content. So those questions, I don't even have the answer, and I'm not even intending to respond to it, but how do we internally within the continent start funding the things we care about and start building that power within? We have the resources, but we're just not using it. And we can't keep talking about Africa rising if we're not thinking about the money to ensure Africa truly rises.
I just love the points you made about Africans not being allowed to tell the stories in filmmaking the way they want it. How can storytelling drive social movements or campaigns in civic participation, human rights movements, or even to end gender-based violence?
I would say that storytelling can but contribute to the movement. so there's a quote that I really like. I think it's by Mary Lowe, and she says like, when you learn a person's story, you cannot hate them. So
True.
you cannot hate someone once you've learned
their story.
And it's one of like my favorite quotes ever, because I think about it and I think about how are we telling the stories when it comes to social change issues. I'm going to use gender-based violence for an instance. We often say 1 in 3 women
Yes.
are going to be a victim of sexual and gender-based violence before they turn 18. First of all, that data is wrong. Yeah. First of all, like putting it out there, because I always say that we don't have the data. That 1 in 3 women is UN Women's statistics of how many years ago.
Yeah.
And in 2026, we're also quoting that statistics with our chest. We need to do our research more. But I also think about how you tell that story. If you tell me 1 in 3 women will be, I'm going to be like, yeah, okay, cool. 1 in 3 women over there, not here. But if you come and say, oh, between Cynthia Priye and Queen CY, one of you will be, and then I can sit back and say, oh,
yeah,
okay, so you have to drive the point home.
True.
And that's really what storytelling can help us do. In terms of even when we're talking about elections now, elections are like fast approaching. We're saying, oh, go and get your voters card, go and get your voters card. A lot of people are like, my vote will not count. What's that? But all of the conversations. But how are we telling them the story? You are not going to go and get a voter's card, but it is you tomorrow that will complain that they've increased transportation.
Yes.
How are we connecting the dots? How are we telling people what affects them and how? There's a story in everything, and there's a way that we can tell the story to drive social change. I do believe very strongly that stories can change the world, because here's what storytelling does. Storytelling will first of all change you as a person. And then the next time you hear that story, you are telling the next person like, oh, this doesn't make sense to me because of this.
Yeah.
And so storytelling can change your mind and your heart, and then change you as a person, and then change the next person and the next person. And so depends on the stories that we're telling. What stories are we telling about the things that we care about?
True.
What stories are we telling about ourselves? Because that's I started a collective called the Fembot Collective. And one of the things that we're doing, we're a creative collective for storytelling, feminist storytelling.
Oh, lovely.
And at the core of it is, what are the stories that we're telling about ourselves? What are the stories that we believe about ourselves?
That's true.
And how can we tell aspirational stories? And it's not just about, oh, okay, a man beats his wife. Yes. But how can we show a different narrative? How can we show things that people can begin to aspire to become? Because storytelling is culture, as far as I'm concerned. The stories that we hear, a woman should not, in my community, in my village, those are the things that build the culture that people now hang on to and believe.
Yeah.
And so how can we begin to show a different narrative? Tell a story of a positive male figure who is like at home and helping his children. How can we create that narrative and tell people that this is believable and you can do and become this person? Tell a story about Nigeria that we have political leaders who care about the people. Who we know.
That's what we're picking the ones.
So yes. So we're aspiring that we would have leaders like this.
Like that.
Tell a story about a country that the economy is great. How can we begin to tell positive stories that we ourselves can begin to aspire to? How can we tell stories that can change norms? That's how we can do it.
Wow.
Positive storytelling.
Positive storytelling.
Yeah.
It feels, I don't know, maybe Neka first before I jump in.
So I think for me, again, with like first coming into, Nigeria with an American upbringing, right? There's this version of feminism or version of, societal norms that I wanted to see from here that now I've accepted that, okay, it does not need to exist here, right? What I think stories need to keep in mind, or storytellers need to keep in mind as we're building and telling stories for the future and, for the current society, right, is there has to be this balance between saying how society is now, but also providing alternative, solutions that benefit, people. I'll speak more specifically, right? So, um, there's recently a candidate who locally, I don't want to, mention too much about her campaign. But she recently, announced, and she's fairly young. It's like kind of like a commissioner position, but she recently announced that she plans on, announced her campaign essentially, and people were excited. People, were sharing that, oh, this is wonderful. We're so excited for her to. And then at the same time, someone kind of came out and said, oh, she's part of this, community. And this community is, I'll just speak specifically, is, the LGBTQIA community, right? And it was not something that she announced as part of like her campaign. And so while I understand, the aspect of wanting to tell her story and like saying that, this is part of like her identity, right? And even for me, like as I'm kind of putting my thoughts together and saying it, because I'm not trying to be like the salacious or like disagree or, but what many, and even for myself, like we're thinking is this is not a part of her story that she decided to share, right? And in her process of, vying for, her campaign and, pushing it forward. Because as I was saying before, what I struggled with when I got here is like the ideals that I have and still do for Nigeria versus like where it is. And I think as we're telling stories and it's affecting real life situations, like, this young lady contesting for a, local position, right? Is we have to be very real about, we have to be very real about where we are.
I can see the way you're taking your time to count your words. It's like, yeah, I understand.
When I say that, it's like you have, as you're making change, especially as you're presenting, forward thinking perspectives and ways that we can sort of like change the society, meet people where they are, right? And as much as this is a very muted version like of myself before, because I was like, like, oh, this person needs this, we need to be changing this, we need to be going this direction, and I still have that in me, right? But after sitting in rooms and seeing people who make big decisions, we have to move from where we are right now, which is, it was not this other person's right, in my opinion, to tell this part of her story, knowing where we are as a society.
Right. True.
And I say this not because we can never get there, right? But we cannot treat our stories as a place of, oh, we wish we were this society of, accepting of this and all of this, and like this experience we're having today is temporary. It's not temporary. It's here. This is the society you exist in, right? And if you want to make the changes, or if you want to, introduce new ideas to people, you have to meet them where they are. If someone came and told me that like my shirt is ugly, right? I will feel a little, I'm going to first feel like a little offended, right? But you have to kind of walk me through, okay, navy blue is not the best on you. And this is a very rudimentary like example, because I'm not trying to get canceled. I'm not trying to, this is a very like rudimentary example, right? But you have to walk people through new concepts, and I'll just leave it there.
Wow, you need to work people through new concepts. When you're in an election season, right? Especially for women, when women come out to run, I'm always worried about the stories that we told about them, because I always say the society forgives men easier than they forgive women in our context. And they are already, the numbers are not looking good. We don't have our bill passed to increase the numbers. So were not even in a very good place. So I get the point you're also making, that if someone has come out in such a politically hostile space for women, then she should have the power to tell the kind of story she wants to tell. No one else should be an author of a story that was not ready to be told. And then that's also the thing around how do we meet people where they are, but also the points Priye made about, I'll call it manifesting the kind of society we want. So when you gave the example about, when we talk about GBV, gender-based violence, we're always like, most time we focus on, we say, oh, this man beats this woman, for instance. What about we tell the stories of the men that are not beating, the men that are doing well, so that younger men, for instance, could aspire for that. But the other thing is also about the stories you talk about Nigeria. They are positives. They may be negatives, but they are positives. How do we also start telling these positives so that people have some level of hope? Because most times what we have is all negative. So the hope is not hoping. You know, it's like there is no light at the end of the tunnel. We're all in a sinking ship. We're done. Let's close shop and everyone, let's japa. But but anywhere you're even going to now, they're also telling people go back home. And the more they are telling you to, I'm sorry I said that. The more they are telling you to, the more people tell you to go back home, the more we need to realize that we need to fix our system. Yes, we need to fix our system. At the end of the day, there's no place like home. That song, oh, my home, oh, my home. There's no place like home. You could create home in any part of the world. I'm very big on freedom of movement. Yeah. I do believe that most of our borders are artificial. And as humans, the world is given to us to nurture, to harness whatever is in it. But we also need to be realistic, because these boundaries and these borders are as real as they get. And they are getting even a lot more hostile to non-citizens or to immigrants. And so at the end of it all, we meet people where they are, but can we be more positive in the stories that we tell? Yeah, Quincy.
So this story is for Priye. I like what you did in The Survivor Don't Owe You a Perfect Story. So my question is, how can everyday people use narrative to challenge dominant political or social structures and navigate stereotypes?
I think that the solution begins with courage. The courage to be able to say, how exactly you feel in the moment. I'm going to use the example of the girl, I forget her name now. On Twitter, I think, on TikTok or Instagram, I'm not sure. But she did talk about how Lagos was like smiling at the time.
Oh, yeah. I think it wasn't a core member.
A core member then at the time. Yeah. And just saying something, like there's a thing we have within the space, the CSO space, where we say, if you see something, say something. Yeah. And I feel like that's really where it starts from. So having the courage to being the one to say, oh no, this doesn't look right. And how can we fix this? Because that's the only solution. I keep saying that the people closest to the problems are the people closest to the solutions.
True.
But oftentimes, if we don't pick up the slab and get going, I feel like the problem with Nigerians is we're always looking for who's going to go next and who can I support to do the work. But then what happens if you begin? And it doesn't have to be grand gestures. You don't have to go to the National Assembly with a placard and say, say, no, it doesn't have to be that grand. But it can be from your little corner, a post on social media to say, I don't think that this is right. And to do it, not when I say have moral courage, I'm not saying go and do it and then put yourself at risk just because you want to show that you're a human rights defender or that you want to call out. But in the simplest way, just have the moral courage. The moral courage is even when the anxiety is creeping in, just keep going and just do it. So I feel like that's like my answer to that. For everyone, like in your little corner, if you're walking down the street and you're drinking pure water, please don't throw it on the floor.
True.
Like just do your bit in the little ways that you can. If you see something, say something, do something as much as you can. not to put yourself at risk while you're doing that, because if you usually the world will go on and people will just keep at it. But in the little way that you can, do something to make this country better than you found it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a bit about these. The survivor does not owe you a perfect story. Why was that important?
Because oftentimes in the work that we do, like, the way that trauma affects people, no two people will experience trauma the same way.
True.
If you and I go through something right now, the way that you experience it is not the way that I experience it.
True.
And the way that you deal with it can just be like, you know what, let me just go and meditate and I will get over it. But then for someone, I'm speaking for myself, for someone who already has underlying mental health issues, I will literally be 6 feet under. I will say my world has ended. Like this is, so when we think about survival stories and survivors are telling you their stories, sometimes you'll be like, how can this thing happen? Where were you when? No survivor owes you a convincing story. A story where you'll be like, oh, I'm convinced that this happened. Because the thing that trauma does is sometimes it reduces some of the things that you remember.
True.
And as you begin to go through it, you begin to remember. You know the way the brain sometimes preserves us. I don't know if something like this has happened to you before. When I was a child, something happened to me and I never remembered. And then as an adult, I'm like,
where is this coming from? I'm
remembering that this thing happened. Like, how am I remembering this now that I did not remember it all of these years ago?
True.
So that's one of the things that trauma does to your brain. It suppresses on your behalf so you can go on. So no survivor owes you a story where you say, oh, I believe her because she said the rape happened in the house, the doors were locked. A survivor can come and tell you that somebody raped me in a car. And the first thing is believe survivors. Believe them.
Yeah. I watched that on your IG and it got me thinking. And most times we always want to ask this question, oh, this is not adding up.
Yes.
Why? But there's something, and I always tell people, if all of us have issues we're dealing with, and I always recommend therapy. I think we all need to, especially as Nigerians.
100%.
There's so many of us carrying trauma up and down. We've just not dealt with it. And it was during therapy, I remember there was certain things that happened to me as a kid, that it was therapy that got me, you're not like, wow, this is why I reacted this way to something that happened. It was a memory from 7 years old that I didn't even know, I never dealt with. And that is what was coming back up. And so for me, it's important that when I saw that, I said, it's actually important that even not just survivors, when it comes to GBV, even when things happen in societies and communities, for instance, insecurity, there are communities that are displaced, we're not giving the survivors from those communities even the opportunity to tell their stories.
Yes.
When the government says they want to do a rehabilitation for terrorists and all, have we wondered how the citizens who experienced the terror of these terrorists would deal with it if they're in a room and the guy just walks in? I'm like, I'm a repentant terrorist. I'm like, there are certain things we don't also think about. The people dealing with those realities, how would they respond to it? And how would they even trust the system ever again? Again. But let me bring Nneka, you did this work, Amicable with My Neighbor, under the Art for Democracy initiative of Yaga Africa, supported by OSF. And I was wondering why that title. I remember the first time I saw Amicable with My Neighbor, I'm like, interesting. Why that title and what was the project about? I mean, maybe, do you have any success stories from that initiative?
For the project, the focus was, how do you sort of foster these conversations amongst people, beyond kind of, I don't like this candidate because they're from this place and I'm from this place. And so the idea was to sort of infuse conversations about, do you know who your local representative is, your commissioner, do you know, we did a mix of vox pops, and so that's where you go on the streets and you ask people questions. You can do, educational games as well. And then we also did some interviews, audio interviews. And I would say from that project, at least for me, I think what I realized is that sometimes, or not even sometimes, but like with elections, I would even say like around the world, like it's important to get to the heart of what is troubling people. not just like what statistically, like what we're seeing in numbers, it's, GDP, etc., but like what do people actually think about the current, situation? So for me, the success in that was honestly hearing from different people, getting to share information with them and saying, hey, this is where you can get your PVC registrations start at this time. And so yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed following some of these vox pop you guys did in the street, and now I have a general question for every one of us here in the studio, and it's simple. We're talking about the power within us as a theme for this conversation. How can we build power better through storytelling? Either building power from within and then as a collective. I will start with you, Pri. How do we build power better?
I would say that everyone has a story to tell. And I think that even within collectives, we need to realize that everyone's voice is important. And in terms of like building power, I tell people, I read this book called Big Magic.
Okay.
Living a Creative Life by Elizabeth Gilbert. And it literally restructured my brain on how creativity works. And I always say, and I always say, like recently I've been saying, you're a creative. Everyone is a creative.
True.
So everyone has a story to tell. And you need to discover your voice. Your voice is different from my voice. And the kind of stories we tell about ourselves will be different. And so even within building collectives, we need to understand that what is our goal? What is the end goal for us? We cannot all come together and say, oh, I want to move towards this, and then everybody will be doing their own different ways, different things. Even within the CSO space, we have the problem of people building things in silos. How do we all come together, come to the table? We want to cook jollof rice. If I have oil and you have tomatoes and you have Maggi, if I cook my rice with my oil, will it be sweet?
It's not. It's rice and oil.
If you cook your rice and Maggi, so how can we bring everything together into the collective pots, put it in, and then cook together? Because that is the only way that we can get anywhere. Even as a country, we all have to come together as one to decide this is what we want. This is what we want to go for. And this is how we're going to get it. So individually, you have power within you. You have stories within you, buried within you to tell. Collectively, we can come together and tell the stories, build up power. Sometimes when my strength fails is where your strength begins. So I can say, oh, Cynthia, I'm so tired. Please, can you? And then we can pick up of that. And you can say, oh, Quincy. And that is how we can move on.
Neka, let's get your thoughts around that. The power within us. What story? How do we use stories to build power as a collective?
The first thing that comes, because for me with telling stories, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel or somewhere that I'm trying to go, right? By 2050, according to the World Bank, Nigeria is projected to have about 400 million people. And then across the continent, we're projected to have about 2.5 billion people, right, by that same 2050. So my thought process is the stories we're telling today, what type of values do you want to impact or impart on that growing society, right? We talked about, earlier about some tales or folk tales that, we heard growing up as kids, right? And so my thought process is for the next generation, that's coming up, what types of values can we add to the stories that we're telling them, or, stories that we're trying to build around them, so that the society that they build in years to come looks completely different from what it is today. And what I mean by that is, what would it look like if, as a country, from the time that you were 6 months old, right, that you were taught, don't put that on the floor. That's not how we do things here. That key thing, that core country culture, not attuned to state, tribe, anything like that. What would it look like if we position stories with the idea of how are we shaping the psyche of someone 40, 50 years from now will be sitting in the presidential seat? What would it look like if the person who maybe not even like in the presidency, but from their 6 months, 2 years, whatever, like age, right? If they were hearing stories of honesty, integrity, societal upkeep, all of those things, and they were things that were in practice. And so for me, the storytelling that we do as Uru Collective and the podcast that we're involved in, it's asking the questions of why. Why do you think that way as an artist? Why do you think that way as a comedian? What brought you here? Because you're trying to get into the mind of people who are leading us as a society in culture, in politics, religion, etc., right? And from there, you can start to tell a consistent line through the stories of what do we value as people and what are we going to value in 2050.
Wow, thank you. And if you were to put a story before a policymaker, what would it be and what change would you want to see?
I'd have to think about all the elements of the story, but what comes to mind for me is how do I tell a story that speaks to the needs of Nigerians and somehow benefits the person I'm speaking to?
Yeah, no, but I mean, that's a brilliant response. Are you still thinking?
I feel like if I was to put a story right now before a policymaker, it would be that if your daughter grew up in a country without women representation and she's aspiring to be like her father, to go into politics, and there is no law. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
How would that make you feel? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that maybe that might touch someone to want to say, oh, where is the gender and equal opportunity bill? Where is it?
Yes.
Because it seems to be missing
somewhere.
Yeah. Or maybe that's the special seat
bill. Oh, true. Yeah. Let's put it. True. No, that's valid. That's valid. Quincy, why?
Okay. First, I'll just go with what she said when she said that although we have individual stories to tell, there's still need for us to come together as collective to work towards one objective in order for us to demand the change we want. And also when doing that, we should also make sure that, because there's something in Nigeria that I noticed that whenever someone wants to tell their story, there's this thing that someone else wants to tell their own story and make it louder than the next person, and to
undermine
the other one's story. And it's not a competition. It's not a competition. We just need to collectively come together in one objective to tell our story so that it will be heard. And also one story maybe I will present to a policymaker will be, so should I just say surviving the leaders.
Surviving the leaders.
Yes. Surviving Nigeria is just because how will a young person finish school with hopes of getting a job, and once you are out, you can even spend sometimes the whole strike might even make a 3 years course to be 5 years, 7 years, or 12 years. So you see some people, I enter school 2005 and I'm graduating 2012. And after the stress and everything, there's no job. Imagine 12 years or 10 years or 7 years gone just like that. What do you think that young person would do? What do you think that young person would think? And when that young person is telling their story, please just listen, because the person has already gone through a lot.
Gone through a lot. We should not be adding to the lot they have gone through.
No.
True question.
It's because
it's not of a head pull. Sometimes you see someone be like, oh, I did sleep with power for 2 days. Someone, your own is just 2 days. I've not slept with power for 7 days. And then one person be like, where do you live? Have you called your AEP? Have you called? You're like, someone did not sleep with power. The fact you had power does not mean that they did not, that they're lying. I think, just reflecting on the topic, and listening to what everyone has said. Most times, I feel like our policymakers, they don't understand what we're sitting on. NECA reeled out the data. The data shows that by 2050, Nigeria will be one of the 9 countries still experiencing population growth. And the numbers will be close to 400 million plus. That is, think about 400 million. And our leaders are not thinking of the fact that these data is as real as it gets. These are numbers of human beings in every local government of the country. And if we don't have a system that is functioning, then we're going to struggle with harnessing the potentials within these millions of humans. And so my story in front of what will possibly be, this is not just mere statistics and numbers. These are human beings. These are human beings that need to survive. They need to eat. They need to care for themselves. They need to feel secured in their communities. And they need to feel like they are thriving and that they are flourishing. And the moment they are not experiencing these, then they can become a threat to you. So you can build your mansions. You can get all the wealth to protect yourself and your generation. But if they are going to live in this community, one day they will become the target. Yeah. And now with the rate of kidnapping and what have you, we already see that it's getting to even you as an elite. You're not as safe as you think you are. And so for me, that will be the story. Think about the numbers beyond the numbers. It's humans, and these humans need to be protected, need to feel secured, they need to survive. If they don't think they can survive, tomorrow you're going to be their target. And you would not survive. All of us, we shall go down with the ship. This is where to pause this conversation. But it's been amazing having both of you on set today. Thank you so much, Nneka and Mobo, for joining this episode. It's been a pleasure having you. Yes. I hope we can pull you another time. Yeah. Hopefully when you're in Abuja, let us know so that we'll have an in-person chat. Yeah. And then, sis, pray. Senior. He says senior. I told you, no, they call me this senior. No, they call me this senior. I don't senior like that. They go think I don't old. But thank you so much, Priye Diri, for being a guest. Yeah, both of you made this time worthwhile. Quincy, why?
Okay, thanks to you for keeping a date with us. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share as we unmute Africa loud and unfiltered. And also don't forget to follow us on all our social media platforms on Instagram, X, Facebook, and on Spotify. And we are here to shout out to people behind the cameras who makes this this
production. Yes, thank you to
so much.
Our crew behind the cameras, behind the scene. They do amazing work. And like you said, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, drop a comment. When you're on, you're amplified. Cheers to Africa.
Cheers.
Africa is great. Amen.